The reality of ancient and medieval warfare, you see, was nothing like the heroic tales, the Hollywood spectacles, or the romantic stories we tell ourselves today. Real battle, in the ancient and medieval world, was a nightmare of blood, terror, and unimaginable brutality, where men died in the most horrific ways imaginable, and survival often came down to pure luck, rather than skill or courage. You're standing on a battlefield in ancient Greece, around 400 BC. The sun is rising, the morning mist is lifting, and across the field you can see them, the enemy phalanx. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of heavily armored warriors, standing shoulder to shoulder, their bronze shields gleaming, their long spears, called sarissas, pointing directly at you like a forest of death. The phalanx formation, you understand, was not just a military tactic, it was a killing machine, perfected by the Greeks over centuries of warfare. These warriors, called hoplites, stood in ranks that could be 8, 12, even 16 men deep. Each man carried a shield, a bronze-tipped spear, and wore armor that weighed upwards of 70 pounds. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. Every single man in that formation knew, with absolute certainty, that many of them would be dead within the hour. The phalanx, as military historians tell us, was a rectangular mass military formation, usually composed entirely of heavy infantry, armed with spears, pikes, sarissas, or similar polearms, tightly packed together. But what this clinical description doesn't capture is the raw psychological terror of facing such a formation. Imagine, if you can, hundreds of spear points advancing toward you in perfect unison, while the men behind them push forward, creating an unstoppable wall of bronze and death. When two phalanxes met in battle, what followed was called the othismos, the Great Push. This wasn't elegant sword fighting. This wasn't heroic single combat. This was a grinding, crushing, suffocating mass of humanity, where men in the front ranks were literally pushed forward by those behind them, whether they wanted to advance or not. The pressure was so intense that men's ribs would crack, their lungs would collapse, and many died not from enemy weapons, but from being crushed by their own comrades. The reality of phalanx combat, according to ancient sources, was that ancient Greek warfare may have simply consisted of two phalanxes slamming into one another until one side fled the field. But that slamming was a collision of human flesh and bronze that created scenes of carnage that would horrify modern audiences. Men in the front ranks, unable to retreat, unable to escape, would be impaled on multiple spear points simultaneously, their screams lost in the cacophony of clashing bronze and dying men. But the Greeks, for all their tactical innovation, were eventually superseded by an even more terrifying military machine: the Roman legion. The Romans, you see, looked at the phalanx and recognized its fundamental weakness. It was rigid, inflexible, and utterly dependent on maintaining formation. So they developed something revolutionary, a military system based not on mass, but on flexibility, discipline, and systematic brutality. The Roman legion, as military experts explain, seems to have developed from the phalanx. In fact, it was a collection of small, well-integrated, well-coordinated phalanxes arrayed in checkerboard formation and operating as a team. But this checkerboard formation, called the manipular system, was far more deadly than any phalanx ever conceived. Each legion numbered approximately 3,600 infantry, divided into 30 maniples, or tactical units, that could operate independently while supporting the whole. Roman soldiers, called legionaries, were not citizen farmers playing at war, like many Greek hoplites. These were professional killers, trained from recruitment to be efficient instruments of death. Their equipment, designed through centuries of battlefield experience, was optimized for one purpose: killing enemies and staying alive while doing it. The gladius, their short sword, was perfect for close-quarters stabbing. The scutum, their shield, was designed to deflect blows while delivering killing strikes. And their armor, the lorica, provided protection while allowing mobility that phalanx fighters could never achieve. Roman battle tactics, you must understand, were based on what modern military theorists call controlled aggression. While Greek phalanx fighting was essentially organized shoving match with spears, Roman combat was systematic dismemberment of enemy formations. The Romans would advance in their checkerboard formation, with the hastati in front, the principes behind them, and the triarii in reserve. When contact was made, what followed wasn't heroic dueling, it was industrial-scale slaughter. The gladius, that short Roman sword, was specifically designed for stabbing rather than slashing. Roman training manuals emphasized thrusting attacks to the abdomen, groin, and throat, areas where armor was weakest and wounds were most likely to be fatal. A Roman soldier was trained to kill his opponent within seconds of contact, then move on to the next enemy, until the entire enemy formation was destroyed or fled in terror. But here's what truly made Roman warfare so devastating. It was the psychological element. Roman armies didn't just defeat enemies, they broke their will to resist through systematic displays of overwhelming force. The sight of Roman legions advancing in perfect formation, shields locked, javelins ready, was enough to cause many enemy armies to flee before contact was even made. And those who stood and fought quickly discovered why the Romans had conquered most of the known world. Medieval warfare, however, brought new innovations in the art of killing and new levels of brutality that would have shocked even hardened Roman veterans. The introduction of mounted, armored knights revolutionized battlefield tactics and created a new aristocracy based entirely on their ability to deal death from horseback. The medieval knight, you see, was not just a warrior, he was a living weapon system, the medieval equivalent of a modern tank. A fully equipped knight, mounted on a trained warhorse, and armed with lance, sword, mace, and other weapons, could smash through infantry formations that would have stopped Roman legions cold. The Norman conquest, historians tell us, was achieved largely thanks to two instruments of war previously unknown in England: the mounted, armored knight, and the castle. Medieval warfare introduced tactical innovations that made ancient battles look almost civilized by comparison. The shield wall, for example, was a common tactic in early medieval warfare, particularly among infantry, where soldiers would stand shoulder to shoulder, holding their shields tightly together to form a defensive wall against enemy attacks. But when a cavalry charge hit a shield wall, the results were catastrophic. Horses weighing 1,200 pounds or more, traveling at full gallop, would crash into infantry formations with the force of modern automobiles, crushing, trampling, and scattering defenders like leaves in a hurricane. The weapons of medieval warfare were designed for maximum damage to heavily armored opponents. The battle axe, the mace, the warhammer, all were created to crush armor and the bones beneath it. These weren't elegant weapons. They were brutal instruments designed to cave in skulls, shatter ribs, and pulverize limbs. Medieval combat was not about skill or finesse. It was about applying overwhelming force to break enemy bodies and enemy morale. Archery, particularly the English longbow, added a new dimension of terror to medieval battlefields. English archers trained from childhood to draw bows with pull weights of 150 pounds or more could send arrows through mail armor at ranges of up to 250 yards. The longbow revolutionized medieval warfare by making heavily armored knights vulnerable to massed missile fire from common soldiers. The crossbow, meanwhile, was even more devastating to traditional armor. Medieval sources describe the crossbow as capable of punching through the finest plate armor at close range. The weapon was so effective that the church tried to ban its use against Christians, though this prohibition was largely ignored. Crossbowmen became some of the most feared soldiers on medieval battlefields, capable of killing the most heavily armored knight with a single well-placed shot. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of medieval warfare was the development of siege warfare. Medieval armies didn't just fight battles, they besieged cities and castles in campaigns that could last months or even years. During these sieges, the civilian population was subjected to horrors that made battlefield combat look merciful. Starvation, disease, and systematic brutality were the norm. When a city finally fell after a long siege, the attacking army traditionally had the right to sack it, meaning rape, murder, and pillage were not just permitted, but expected. Medieval weapons development was driven by an arms race between offensive and defensive technologies that pushed both to ever greater extremes. As armor became heavier and more sophisticated, weapons became more brutal and specialized. The warhammer developed specifically to punch through plate armor. The poleaxe combined axe, hammer, and spear, point to defeat any type of protection. And the crossbow evolved into siege weapons capable of hurling bolts the size of spears with enough force to kill multiple men in a single shot. The reality of medieval combat for the common soldier was that survival depended more on luck than skill. Battles were chaotic melees where friend and foe were often indistinguishable, where a single misstep could mean death, and where the wounded were often finished off by scavengers after the fighting ended. Medical care was primitive at best, meaning that wounds that would be minor today were often fatal. A simple cut could become infected and kill within days. What made ancient and medieval warfare particularly brutal was the complete absence of any concept resembling modern rules of war. Civilians were legitimate targets. Prisoners could be enslaved or executed at will. Wounded enemies were often killed rather than treated. And the psychological trauma that we now recognize as PTSD was simply an accepted part of a warrior's life, if he lived long enough to experience it. The weapons themselves tell the story of humanity's increasing sophistication in the art of killing. From the bronze-tipped spears of ancient Greeks to the steel crossbow bolts of medieval Europe, each innovation made warfare deadlier and more efficient. The progression from simple swords to complex polearms like the halberd shows how weapons evolved to counter every defensive innovation, ensuring that the art of war remained a deadly game where the stakes were always life or death. Ancient and medieval battles were also shaped by factors that modern armies rarely face. Weather could determine victory or defeat. Terrain could make sophisticated tactics impossible, and disease killed more soldiers than combat. Ancient and medieval armies were constantly threatened by plague, dysentery, and other diseases that could destroy entire formations without a single enemy being sighted. The psychology of ancient and medieval combat was fundamentally different from modern warfare. These were societies where violence was a daily reality, where public executions were entertainment, and where the warrior class defined itself through its ability to kill efficiently. The mental conditioning required to stand in a phalanx or charge with medieval cavalry was created through lifelong exposure to violence that would traumatize modern soldiers. Training for ancient and medieval warfare was brutal by today's standards. Roman gladiator schools, Greek gymnasium, and medieval knightly training all emphasized physical conditioning and weapon skills through methods that would be considered abusive today. Warriors were literally beaten into shape, taught to ignore pain, and conditioned to kill without hesitation or remorse. The tactical formations used in ancient and medieval warfare were developed through trial and error over centuries of constant conflict. The phalanx, the legion, the shield wall, all were refined through thousands of battles, where the price of tactical innovation was measured in human lives. Each formation had its strengths and weaknesses, and military commanders spent their careers learning how to exploit enemy weaknesses while protecting their own vulnerabilities. What made ancient and medieval warfare particularly devastating was the complete integration of violence into daily life. These were not societies that went to war occasionally. These were warrior cultures where conflict was the norm and peace was a temporary interruption. Professional soldiers, citizen militias, and mercenary companies all contributed to a military culture where fighting was not just a job, but a way of life. The reality of battle in the ancient and medieval world was that it was dirty, brutal, and utterly without mercy. There were no heroic last stands, no noble sacrifices, no clean deaths. There was only the grinding reality of human beings using every tool at their disposal to kill other human beings as efficiently as possible. And in that reality, the strong survived, the weak died, and civilization advanced over the bodies of those who fell in the endless cycle of war that defined human existence for thousands of years. This, then, is the truth about ancient and medieval warfare. It was humanity at its most brutal, most efficient, and most deadly. The warriors who fought these battles were not heroes in the modern sense. They were survivors in a world where survival meant being better at killing than anyone else. And the battles they fought shaped not just military history, but the entire development of human civilization, creating the world we inhabit today through an unbroken chain of violence, innovation, and the eternal human struggle for dominance.